Hi everyone and welcome to this presentation about intercultural competence and communication. My name is Sharon Chaden Glass. I am currently an instructional media designer at Sinclair Community College in Dayton, Ohio. This presentation that I'm going to give today is the presentation that I gave at Ohio TESOL 2019 in Columbus, Ohio. So if you are not able to attend that conference, this is for you. My intended audience for this session is K-12 English language learner teachers, but really there's a lot in this presentation that's applicable to anyone who works with English language learners, international students, people who are learning English as an additional language. For that matter, it could also apply to just about everyone in the world. As you'll see in this presentation, we all need to improve our intercultural competence as the world begins to become more globalized and migrations are happening everywhere. All right, so let's get into it. A little bit about me so you know kind of where I'm coming from. I was a previous ESL teacher in higher education and intensive English programs in Ohio, both at Wright State first and then at University of Dayton. I just recently had a career change and now I am moving into the field of video production and instructional design. What I'm talking about today is based on 13 years of past experience, both as a teacher and in the last 4 or 5 years, my experience coordinating programs, intercultural communication programs at the University of Dayton. I am also the current co-editor for Intercom, which is the newsletter for TESOL International's Intercultural Communication Interest section. And in the next slide, I have a Q code where you can access some materials about how to get started publishing in TESOL if that is interesting to you. One of the partnerships that I participated in at the University of Dayton is actually going to be published about in Michigan Journal of Community Service Learning. I worked with 2 teacher ed professors at University of Dayton and we co-authored a paper that is going to be published on one of the partnerships that I was involved in. All right, so you can grab that Q code, or if you prefer, you can go directly to that link. It will take you to a Google folder that includes the PowerPoint slides, but also some other documents, one being how to get started in TESOL for publishing. Another is what I call an intercultural competence toolkit with some links and resources that if this interests you and you want to have something else to read that you can just go to and start your journey there. Also, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you think that I can be helpful to you. Sometimes I like to tag people in upcoming posts of things that are coming out in our newsletter. And you can also find a document in there about the YouTube channel that I host where I post previous professional development and videos, academic English videos, mostly for international students who are preparing to enter the university. All right, so the purpose of this session in particular, I put this together as a response to TESOL International's action agenda for the future of the TESOL profession. So in 2017, a group of TESOL leaders got together and distilled down into 5 key priorities what the profession should focus on. And priority number 2 was about intercultural communication and multilingualism. So you can see some of the things that are written in the report on this slide in particular. So the reason that I made this presentation is because a lot of this information that I'm talking about today is not typically part of TESOL education programs, whether you did a certificate or an endorsement or even a master's. It's part of some, but not all. There's a lot of emphasis on instruction, materials design, assessment, interventions, but I think we are really missing this component about how do we communicate effectively across cultures. how can we develop our intercultural competence? And so that's the purpose of this session, is to kind of step in and provide information within that gap. So in this particular session, what I'm going to do is relate and differentiate culture and identity, because sometimes those end up being confused. So I want to have our terms straight so we all know what we're talking about. I'm also going to describe, relate, and connect theories from intercultural competence development and communication with practical experiences that could actually happen in your classroom. And I will also explore the complexity of culture in an age of global migration and globalization. And I'll also provide you some simple tips for improving your own intercultural communication. All right, so maybe you have played this game. If not, it's very simple. The game is actually called Two Truths and a Lie. And the idea is somebody says 3 statements and you have to figure out which one is a lie. So instead of doing 2 truths and a lie, I'm doing 3 truths and 3 lies. Okay, so here are the statements. So pause the video at this point and write down on your paper if you think each of those statements is truth or a lie. Okay, I'm going to trust that you did that. And moving on, again, in terms of framing our discussion and making sure that we have the same terms for talking about things, I want you to think about what characteristics you think an interculturally competent person has. And take a minute and write those on your paper. If you're not going to write, then I actually want you to pause and think about this. If somebody said this person's interculturally competent, what does that look like? What behaviors does that person have? What do they do? And that I will answer later in this presentation. So the very first thing, in order to be interculturally competent, the first thing is you need to know yourself. So I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and I want you to just think in your head about what you would say to these questions. What is your identity? What is your culture? So what you think in response to these questions shows a lot, actually. It shows your own development of intercultural competence. It might also show your place where you are right now. As we'll see, sometimes we feel parts of our identity more strongly in certain situations than at other times. So that's why I want to take some time to talk about what do we mean by culture and what do we mean by identity. We're going to see that in intercultural competence, a lot of it is practicing mindfulness of yourself, knowing the situation that you're in, and the person that you're speaking with. Understanding that the person that you're speaking with is the person you're imagining that they are. When you're speaking with someone, you're not speaking with who they actually are. You're speaking with who you think they are. And especially when it's a stranger, right? They're giving you information about themselves and you're learning. So when we come into a situation with a person we don't know across cultures, we already have ideas about what they're like. And that's why we can be surprised sometimes and be like, oh, I didn't think that they were going to do that or say that because I thought people from that culture were like that. We come to a situation already with an idea of what the person's going to be like. And when we meet a person that we can't figure out exactly where we want to put them, we feel really, we can feel anxious and uncomfortable. Like if we meet someone and we can't tell if the person identifies as a man or a woman, that can make people feel uncomfortable because they don't know what to expect. So having this mindfulness of yourself, the situation, and the person that you are speaking with is really a key to developing strong intercultural competence. All right, so our terms. Identity. Identity is experienced internally and it's expressed in social situations. Okay? It's multifaceted. We wear multiple roles and we wear multiple faces in a day. It's also dynamic. It shifts. Sometimes we're in a situation and some part of our identity comes forward and pushes everything else aside. So for example, if you're an English language teacher at your school to English learners and you're the only one in that school that does that, you're feeling like the English language teacher all day long because who you are is different than everyone else at that school. So I'm a woman. If I walk into a room of men, I'm feeling incredibly female. Maybe I wasn't feeling that out in the hallway where it was 50-50, half women, half men. But that's what I'm saying about certain aspects of our identity can feel more salient in different situations. Culture, on the other hand, is experienced socially. And culture shapes our values, our beliefs, and our norms. Culture, when we share a culture with another person, it means that we are playing by the same rules. We know the rules. When we share a culture, we know what the rules are. We can bend them, break them, we can rebel against them, but we know what the rules are. When we do not share a culture with somebody, we may be playing by different rules. We might have overlapping rules. We might have completely different rules. And that's what causes the disorientation of culture shock, is when we are in a place where we don't understand the rules. And then that makes us feel like, well, what do we know? What do we know for certain? And this can be really hard for people to understand who have not experienced cultural difference, who have not been the outsider. If you've always been in a place where everyone shares your culture, your views, your values, the rules that you understand are constantly displayed in mass media and all around you, culture can feel invisible. But it doesn't feel invisible to the people who are playing by different rules or experience difference and are not part of that mainstream culture. Okay? So a visual way of understanding these two differences, I made this little diagram here. So inside this funnel, we have all these different aspects of our identity, our sense of self, who we are. And some of those aspects we feel more at other times than we don't. Like ability. You may not, if you don't have a disability, you may not ever think about the fact that you're not blind or you're not deaf or you don't have a physical limitation that causes you, that requires that you do things differently. But all of those aspects of ourselves overlap and mesh together, and all of them are filtered through our culture. And that's really the relationship that these two things have. We have an identity that is composed of all these things, and all of it is funneled through culture. So identity is experienced internally. Culture is experienced socially. If we don't have people around us, we don't have culture. Culture emerges between people. It's not experienced only by yourself. All right, intercultural competence means that you are aware of the rules that govern how you see the world and how you behave. If you say, I don't have culture, that's one stage of developing intercultural competence, the very first one, and it does show where you are at in developing, but you do have culture. Intercultural competence also means that you understand that other people might be following different rules. Okay? Darla Deardorff has a fantastic definition of intercultural competence that is widely cited. She's from the field of international education. And she says that intercultural competence is the ability to communicate effectively and appropriately. And that's important. You might be able to get your message across in another culture, but if you do it inappropriately and you offend people, that's not helpful. You need to be able to communicate your message and do so in a way that keeps everybody's dignity intact. So it's their ability to communicate effectively and appropriately in intercultural situations based on one's intercultural knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Nowhere in this definition does it say speaks a lot of languages, because it's more than that. It's not just the words. It's intercultural competence is about being able to use skills and strategies and appropriate attitudes to develop your knowledge so that you are appropriate and effective. All right, so let's go over those answers to 3 truths and 3 lies. We're going to grade yourself. You're going to learn a little bit about intercultural competence and communication and be totally awesome. All right, so let's start with 3 myths. Myth 1 is that some people don't have culture, aka, I'm just normal. So if you've ever thought that, and I know I have, because for a very long time I was surrounded by my own culture and I didn't know that there were other ways of creating rules for engaging with others. You are just blind to the fact that you have a cultural lens. And that's why I used Gary Larson's cartoon from the far side. I'll read it to you. So we have some spaceships coming to Earth, and it looks like an older gentleman, a farmer. It is the aliens are basically arms with hands on the top, and the farmer is shaking one of the hands. And the cartoon reads, inadvertently, Roy dooms the entire Earth to annihilation when, in an attempt to be friendly, he seizes their leader by the head and shakes vigorously. So Roy is following his own cultural lens. He doesn't understand that this can be seen differently to another group of people. And to demonstrate this cultural blindness, here's a question for you. All of these images are from Adobe Stock, which means that they were tagged by somebody with the word culture. So I went into Adobe Stock and I searched culture. Which of these pictures do you think were displayed under the tag culture? Take a minute. You can pause if you'd like. All right. So I'm going to circle them for you. So the ones that were tagged with the word culture are, hopefully I can do this. Yep. This one. This one. This one. This one. And this one. So you can probably tell that the pictures that were tagged with culture are the ones that are coming from cultures outside of the West, outside of the United States. I'm going to use the West because some of these, like the handshaking, that could be more than the United States. But these, when these pictures are tagged with culture, it's showing the position of the person who's curating the images. We tend to associate culture with things that are different than our own culture and not recognize that we ourselves have culture. So that really does say a lot about the position of the person. If it doesn't say anything about the curator, it definitely says something about how the people who are tagging these pictures are imagining the search being carried out by the person who's doing the search. They're imagining what kinds of pictures does a user want to see in the results that we provide them. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move on to the staircase model of intercultural competence by Ting-Toomey and Chung, and this speaks again to that idea of cultural blindness. So Ting-Toomey and Chung envision the development of intercultural competence as a series of stages of increasing awareness, of kind of awakening to the existence of cultural competence. And the very bottom level is unconscious incompetence. In other words, you don't know you're interculturally incompetent. You have no idea that that's even a thing about yourself. The second step is conscious incompetence, meaning you know that you're interculturally incompetent. It's a frustrating place to be because you see that you lack something and you may not know what to do about it. Green is conscious competence, where you actively think about how to use the rules of the new culture that you're in. And so a lot of the work that emerging English learners are doing is happening here. You know, it's happening and it's messy and it's imperfect, and the people who are going through these stages of developing intercultural competence go through a lot of stress to figure out what are the new rules and how do I use them effectively. And a lot of work is done here. And the last stage is unconscious competence. You don't know that you're interculturally competent. And this would apply to students who are bicultural or multicultural or multilingual, where they move in between cultures seamlessly, and they're not having to consciously all the time think about what to do. So that is a stage of intercultural competence as well. All right, so myth number 2 is that having intercultural competence means that you know about a lot of other cultures. I will clarify that that might be true, but it doesn't always have to be true. What you're seeing in this image here on the right, and I know that's hard to read, so I'm going to annotate a little bit here so you can see. This here it reads North America. This is where we're going to be focusing. And this over here is Europe, this green part right here. And what this graph is showing are migration patterns from one continent to another, or from one part of a continent to another. So we can see that, that the United States, Canada, North America, and also Europe is still the top place for migrants to move to. But I think that the greater takeaway from this graph is that people are moving everywhere. I mean, people are moving from Southeast Asia to North America. They're moving from South Asia to Europe, South Asia to West Asia. Okay, so people all over the world are moving. National Geographic had an issue within the last 6 months. So right now is October 2019. So at some point in the last 6 months, they had an issue about the world on the move, all about these global migrations that are happening because of climate change and war in particular. So with so many different people migrating to new lands, intercultural competence is becoming vitally important to all domains of social and political life. At the same time, it's important to understand that you don't need to know all of these cultures, all of the histories, all of the languages. You don't need to know all of them to be interculturally competent. What you do need are to develop appropriate skills and strategies so you can build your cultural knowledge so that you can be an effective communicator. Right now, English is the international language. In fact, English today is spoken more between non-native speakers of English than native speakers of English. That's where we're at this point. And so intercultural competence is so important to help people who are coming from different parts of the world to be able to communicate effectively using English as an international language. It's the path to peace, in my opinion. All right. So it's really necessary to update our understanding of culture. If you take nothing away from this talk, I hope that you take away this idea that nation doesn't necessarily mean culture. We know that there are people who don't have a state, who have culture, and a very unique culture, like the Kurds, like the Rohingya Muslims, who are still looking for a place where they can safely live. These are people who have a distinct culture and don't have a nation. But there's also, taking into consideration global migrations, these are real cultural experiences. Over here on my slide, these are actual people. These are their lives. What is the cultural experience of a French adult whose parents were Algerian immigrants? Or the Syrian refugee who's growing up in Germany? Or an Italian adult whose parents immigrated from Japan? Or Indian parents who are trying to build a life for their kids in the UAE? Or British children whose grandparents immigrated from Pakistan? So in a time where it's becoming more and more complicated, people's cultural backgrounds and their existences, we need to have a better understanding of what culture is. Some people like to turn to Hofstede, and I'll write that here. Some people like to turn to Hofstede's categorizations of culture. Hofstede categorized cultures by things like, is it individualist or collectivist, or high power distance or low power distance? And I think that is useful for understanding at a kind of macro level. But I think that it's dangerous to have that be the only conceptual framework that we're using in talking about culture, because we know that people don't necessarily fit 100% inside their cultures. There has to be room for the variation of the individual. But it makes sense because Hofstede was coming from a business management background. So anyway, I just wanted to say that there is another way of looking at culture beside just categorizing them in these big categories. And you can understand, you might have a student like this. This is actually a student I had in 2008. You might have a student like this, right? So when you have students that have these multicultural, multilingual experiences because of global migration patterns, this is not so uncommon. So we really need to have a better understanding of how to understand culture. And that's why I turn to hybrid theory, which is first kind of talked about by Babha and more recently written about by Adrian Holiday. His work is quite good. And what hybrid theory does is it contextualizes the idea of culture in a modern world where global migration is increasing. So if you don't understand that, go back to what I was saying about identity, that we can have these multiple layers of self that enmesh and overlap each other. And then you can kind of connect those two ideas and see that what Holiday says is that hybridity is how we all are. We are all looking for an openness of cultural travel in which we can be new selves in new domains. And I think that that's very empowering for English learners who may feel they don't completely belong to one culture or another. If you can find a way to concretely bring across this idea that we're all hybrids, we all have these different layers of identity, these different cultural influences, then you can create this middle ground. Some theorists call it a third culture, where all cultural spheres that a student belongs to are valued and affirmed. And that can be really empowering when a student feels like that they belong. When they have that sense of belonging, it's easier for them to learn, right? All right, so moving on. So based on what we've just been talking about, what we take away from hybrid theory, it's increasingly useful to enter intercultural experiences with the perspective that the people that we're talking from in other cultures are likely to share some common experiences with us. In a global world, it's possible that 3 different people from 3 different countries, 3 different cultures may enjoy the same singer, or maybe they have all experienced international moves. Maybe they're all afraid of shaming their parents for not passing a class. So in this sense, intercultural competence is less about how much you've traveled and how many languages you speak. And it's more about these questions about cognitive flexibility and resilience. So here's some questions. Can you imagine other perspectives? Can you actively listen? Can you remain curious? Knowing that curiosity means that you have the humility to know that you don't know everything, and that's okay, but you seek out the limits of what you know. You try to go beyond that. You try to go all the way up to the edge of what you know, and you try to find out what you don't know. Can you persevere after failure and embarrassment? It's not so easy sometimes. It doesn't feel good to be in that space of, oh, I totally offended that person. And this is a challenge for young people. Young people today, I know in the United States, don't want to offend anyone ever. And the idea that they might offend someone just makes them shut their mouth. But that's not the answer. So the answer really is, can you be respectful? Can you establish rapport with other people? And when you mess up, because you will mess up, can you move on? Can you repair that broken trust? Can you mend that communication? That's really vital to intercultural competence. Can you be okay with not having an answer? That is really hard for some people. Some people, they need to know this or this, right or wrong, black or white. But intercultural competence, people who have it understand that sometimes there's a middle ground where you're just not going to understand because you're not coming from that cultural lens. Maybe it's something you can't imagine. And you have to be okay with that and accept people who are coming from that cultural lens. You have to be able to accept their reality, how their lived reality of the experience. So I mentioned that I would share with you characteristics of an interculturally competent person. And I'm taking this from a really great book that I just recently reviewed. It's by, here we go. It's called Teaching with a Global Perspective by Don Bikowski and Talin Phillips. They're at Ohio University. And here are some characteristics that they gave. And you'll notice, you can pause here and read if you want, but I'll just comment that you'll notice that a lot of it hits on that point of mindfulness. It's recognizing how big of a role culture takes in our interactions. It's questioning our own responses. It's having skills and strategies for dealing with anxiety and focusing on meaning in communication. It's being willing to hear other perspectives, non-defensively disagreeing. It's appreciating others' accomplishments and being able to resolve conflict. All right, and our third myth is that intercultural competence can be measured by taking a test. What I'll say here is there's not just one test. There are many, many tests, many, many assessments that people have created with the goal of somehow measuring a person's intercultural competence. But as a teacher, you know that you need multiple measures of assessment to get the whole picture of a student. And the same is true with intercultural competence. There's not just one test that you can take. So if you take any of these assessments, I think it's good as a reference point and a guide, but there's no test you can take that will say that person's interculturally competent and that person's not. The one test that I think has been most widely used for measuring intercultural competence, at least gauging it, is Bennett's developmental model of intercultural sensitivity. The test is called the Intercultural Development Inventory at the IDI. It needs to be administered by a person who's been certified to administer it, so it's not something that you can go online and just quickly do and find out, although there are tests that are like that you can do. I'm not going to say a ton about this other than I think that Bennett's model is helpful in giving people a good starting point of understanding where they might be, what they can do to improve. So if that interests you, it's something that you can look into. All right, and our 3 truths of intercultural competence. The first one is that intercultural competence is quickly becoming a leading soft skill for the workplace. All right, so the future world of work for human beings is all about soft skills. So we know that automation is increasing year by year. And so tomorrow's students are going to increasingly need to be able to get jobs that are not routine manual jobs. Jobs of the future are going to capitalize on the general and social intelligence that AI hasn't mastered yet. And so here are some of the most in-demand soft skills that employers are asking for. So I think you can see, and you'll probably agree that, yeah, these are things that you see in just about every job posting. Prioritizing the development of intercultural competence can also be seen as preparing students for career readiness. Okay, so if you need to have an argument for why you need to do intercultural competence development in your classroom, this is why. Usually once you get jobs involved, people start paying attention, right? All right, our second truth is that 3 attitudes that are essential to developing intercultural competence are respect, openness, and curiosity. And so the first thing I put up here is actually from that action agenda from TESOL International. And I put this quote up: engage in practices, and this is advice for English language teachers and program administrators, that we foster global engagement by engaging in practices that recognize multilingualism as an asset to English language teaching that positively influences language outcomes, innovation, and practice. And I put that on here because I feel that it's very easy to fall into the trap of seeing an English learner as deficient. There's something wrong with you and we are going to fix you. That's really not the attitude that we need to have in a day and age where multilingualism is should be so valued. And it's our job as TESOL professionals to model respect and model openness and model curiosity for our students so that they can be interculturally competent. Nobody learns best when they feel that they're deficient. That is not how people work. People learn best when they feel that they belong and they're valued. And we need to be modeling that for our students. The second point that I'll make here, I'm going to pull in a little more theory to explain this truth. Darla Deardorff's process model of intercultural competence is a leading model for understanding how we develop intercultural competence throughout our life. This is her model, and I'm going to, make it bigger in just a moment. So what I want you to see holistically here is that it's a cycle, right? Let me draw on here. It's a cycle. And there's no end, which kind of answers one of those other statements from above. And the way that she sees it is that we start with key attitudes. We start with having respect, being open, and being curious. And those attitudes support us as we engage with other people and other cultures. We practice our skills of listening, observing, evaluating, analyzing, relating, and interpreting. All of those skills that we need to be competent. As we use our skills, we're developing our cultural knowledge. We're understanding our own culture. We're starting to feel what the rules are that we are abiding by. And we're seeing difference in the rules with somebody from another culture. We're developing that deep cultural knowledge. When we walk away from an intercultural situation, we reflect. Think about, what did I do? That was effective. Why was it effective? That didn't go so well. What happened? What was the misunderstanding? What could I have done differently? Or was the problem with them? Maybe it was both of us. So having that reflection to think about what happened in that situation, that's developing our empathy, our cognitive flexibility, and it's moving us to an ethno-relative viewpoint. And all of that serves to shift our frame of reference. And when we shift our frame of reference, we can have more effective, more appropriate communication and behavior. And that just goes back into supporting our attitudes again. So some considerations I want to bring up here for multilingual classrooms. So if you teach English to a classroom with a lot of students from a lot of different languages, all ports contact theory is really helpful in thinking about how to create assignments, activities, interactions between your students that reduce prejudice between them. Because like I said, all of us come into a situation, an interaction with an expectation of what that person's going to be like. And maybe they support, maybe what they do falls into our expectations or goes against them. And so Allport has some very good, what Allport does is he describes conditions for reducing prejudice and intergroup conflict. And the 4 areas that he mentions are equal status. So everyone in the group has equal status. Common goals. They're working towards something. So it could be a group project, and everyone in that project is doing a role that has equal importance and is equally valuable. They're interdependent. They need each other to do the project. It's not like just one person can do it and everyone else just signs off on it. So, and finally, support for the norms. So you are supporting how they're behaving with each other. You are available and you are kind of holding them accountable to all participating effectively. Your challenge as the teacher is to think about what activities, assignments, projects It could even be problem-based learning. What are you having them do that gives them all equal status, a common goal, makes them interdependent, and that you can support them? Problem-based learning is wonderful for this if you've never looked into it. Problem-based learning might be the answer for a lot of people for getting your learners to come together, build rapport, build trust with each other. So just some questions for you to consider in your own classroom practice. Your class is the authentic environment where your students are developing their intercultural competence. It's ground zero. So think about what you can do to help them be interculturally effective, right? And finally, the last truth is that developing intercultural competence is a lifelong process. I watched a webinar with Darla Deardorff a while back, and she admits it's hard to acknowledge that you don't just achieve intercultural competence and you're done. It's a lifelong process that you never are done doing, right? You cultivate self-reflection after intercultural experiences. So if you have a multilingual classroom, and let's say you're doing a problem-based learning and they're working on their project, make part of the end of that debriefing of the project, make part of it a self-reflection on their intercultural communication. How effective were they? What obstacles did they face? Were there any speed bumps in their progress? Have them think about those things critically. You might need to guide them. You might need to model how to do that. If you're in higher education, that book that I mentioned before, Teaching with a Global Perspective, is really, really great in helping instructors, professors, lecturers think critically about how they're building their class in higher education, how to incorporate into participation, into feedback, into assessment, global competencies. You also need to prepare students for the messiness of intercultural communication, because it can be messy. Sometimes that means modeling, asking for forgiveness. If your students may not know how to do that, if I think nobody, I won't say nobody, but most people don't intend to offend others. They are trying to avoid that. And so when it does happen in your class, find a way to keep the dignity of all your learners intact. So they see how to move forward through those really sticky spots. And finally, it's not reasonable to expect that students are going to achieve intercultural competence without actually interacting with someone from another culture. They can't do it in a one-day workshop. Neither can your staff or the other people you're working with. You can't do it in heavily structured or facilitated exchanges. You're not going to do it over the course of a semester or 5 weeks studying in another country. And you're not going to do it without experiencing discomfort and regression. All of that is part of what I mean by the messiness of intercultural communication. So I think it's important to have realistic expectations for if you're going to do intercultural competence training or education for your students, you need to have realistic expectations of what you want them to be able to do. All right, so my quick and dirty checklist for developing intercultural competence. Be aware of your cultural lens. Know what it is. If you don't know what it is, take some time to unpack all those layers of self. Have a conversation with someone from another culture. Find out what your expectations and assumptions are. Shut up and listen. That's hard sometimes, especially for Americans who want to fill the silence all the time. Be curious. Be okay with the fact that it's okay to not know everything. And be respectful when you ask questions. You have to accept people as they are, not as you expect them to be. You're going to have expectations of the way that person is, but however they present themselves is the way that you have to accept them. And reflect on your own intercultural interactions. When were you effective? When were you not effective? Okay, why do you think some situations went well and some went differently? Because all of that is going to go towards shifting your frame of reference. All right, and finally, again, there is the slide where you can grab my materials. You can access that document if you want to get started publishing with TESOL International. I have some resources there for you to look at. And do feel free to connect with me or email me if you have questions. And I'll make sure that you see my references. This one here, sorry, right here. That's that action agenda for the future of the TESOL profession that I kept referring to. All right. Thank you for joining me today. It was a pleasure to have you sit here with me and learn a little bit more. And I hope that this helped your practice and gave you ideas about what to do for your own English learners. I hope I see you again. Have a great day.